On the banks of the Volga River in the summer of 922, an Arab diplomat witnessed something that would haunt the historical record for centuries. Ahmad ibn Fadlan stood among a group of Rus Vikings, watching as they prepared their chieftain's funeral. At the center of this ceremony stood a young enslaved woman who had agreed to follow her master into death. What followed was not a solemn religious rite, but a calculated sequence of violence that blurred the line between sacred duty and brutal spectacle. Ibn Fadlan's account remains the only eyewitness description of this Viking funeral practice, and while historians debate its accuracy and prevalence, archaeological evidence suggests that human sacrifice at elite Viking burials was real, if rare. The longships appeared without warning, their dragon-headed prows cutting through morning mist as they struck the Irish coastline near Dublin in 821. According to the Annals of Ulster, the Viking raiders carried away a great number of women into captivity that day, adding to thousands of souls torn from their homes across northern and western Europe. These raids were not random acts of violence, but calculated operations. Women held particular value as captives, not merely for ransom, but as skilled laborers who could weave the vast quantities of cloth needed for Viking sails, tend households, and populate the new settlements spreading across Scandinavia and beyond. DNA evidence from Iceland reveals that up to two-thirds of the island's founding female population had Gaelic origins from Ireland or Scotland, while only one-third of men did, suggesting these women arrived not as willing migrants but as captives. The journey from free person to thrall, the Old Norse word for slave, could happen in moments. One instant, a woman might be tending her family's hearth or working in the fields. The next, rough hands seized her, iron collars clasped around her neck, and she found herself bound in the hold of a ship sailing toward an unknown fate. Some would be sold in slave markets, stretching from Dublin to the Volga. Others kept as household slaves, and a few, like the young woman Ibn Fadlan would witness, chosen for purposes far darker. When the Rus chieftain died on the Volga, his crew gathered his enslaved people and posed a question that carried the weight of death. Which of them would volunteer to accompany their master into the afterlife? One woman stepped forward. Ibn Fadlan describes how she agreed to this fate, though he questioned whether such a choice could ever be considered truly free. The word voluntary carries little meaning when spoken by someone who owns nothing, inherits nothing, and exists at the mercy of their captors. Yet the woman who accepted this role underwent a transformation in status during the days that followed. She was elevated above the other enslaved people, given fine food and drink, and treated with a deference she had never known in life. For 10 days she feasted and celebrated while the funeral preparations proceeded around her. New clothes were sewn for the dead chieftain. Alcoholic drink was prepared in vast quantities. A ship was dragged ashore to serve as the funeral vessel. Throughout these days, the woman moved through the Viking camp with an authority that must have felt surreal. She was no longer merely property. She had become something else, something sacred and terrible, a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The day of the ceremony arrived, with the ship prepared as a funeral bed. The dead chieftain was exhumed from his temporary grave, dressed in his finest garments, and positioned on the vessel, surrounded by weapons, food, and mead. Animal sacrifices followed in methodical succession. A dog was cut in half and placed aboard. 2 horses, 2 cows, a rooster, and a hen received the same treatment, their blood sanctifying the ship. Then came the woman's final duties: She was escorted from tent to tent, participating in ritual acts carried out as part of the funeral ceremony. Ibn Fadlan recorded what happened next with clinical precision, though his disgust seeped through his words. 6 men participated in the final ritual with her, each invoking the deceased chieftain and presenting symbolic pledges of loyalty intended to accompany him into the next world. This was not about enjoyment or personal longing. It was theater, a public performance of cosmic obligation. The Vikings beat their shields outside as she moved between the tents, the rhythmic pounding creating a barrier of sound. Whether this noise was meant to heighten the ritual's power or to mask any protests from within, Ibn Fadlan did not speculate. Throughout it all, the woman sang. Old accounts claim she sang of paradise and of seeing her dead master waiting for her beyond a doorframe suspended in the air. Finally, the woman was led to the ship, where an older woman waited. The Vikings called this figure the Angel of Death. She controlled what came next with practiced authority. Strong drink was pressed into the enslaved woman's hands until her steps grew unsteady, until the sharp edges of reality began to blur. She was guided into a small structure built upon the ship's deck, placed beside her dead master. Outside, the shield beating intensified, hundreds of Vikings striking wood against metal, creating a wall of noise. Ibn Fadlan wrote that they beat their shields to cover any screams, to prevent the sounds from discouraging other enslaved people from volunteering in the future. Inside that enclosed space, 6 men held the woman down. The Angel of Death wrapped a rope around her neck. 2 men pulled in opposite directions, while the old woman used a blade to complete the final act of the ritual. The account offers no clean death, no merciful release. The killing was brutal and prolonged, executed with the kind of precision that spoke of practice. When it was finished, the woman's body was arranged beside her master, her purpose fulfilled. With all sacrifices complete, the living departed the vessel. The closest male relative of the dead chieftain, dressed only in the minimal garments required for the ritual, walked backward toward the ship, holding a lit torch awkwardly between his knees, shielding his face from the vessel as though the sight of it might bring misfortune. He thrust the flame into the kindling that had been piled around the ship's hull. Fire consumed the structure rapidly, fed by the oils and resins the Vikings had prepared. The flames climbed higher, transforming wood and flesh into smoke and ash. This was the moment everything had built toward, the ritual's terrible crescendo. In Viking belief, the fire did not destroy, but transformed and purified. It released spirits from their earthly vessels and carried them to whatever realm awaited beyond. For the enslaved woman, there would be no grave, no marker, no individual memory. She would become indistinguishable from her master in death, her ashes mingling with his in a final, involuntary intimacy. Archaeological evidence from Norway suggests this practice occurred elsewhere in the Viking world. Excavations have uncovered graves containing decapitated individuals buried alongside their masters, their bodies positioned without the dignity of proper burial rites. Whether these deaths were considered sacrifices to the gods or simply the expected fate of those who served the powerful, the result was the same. Freedom ended where power demanded it, and for the enslaved in Viking society, even death belonged to someone else.